Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry to interrupt your lunch. Hopefully, you're having a good day. I apologize for being late. I was at the American Psychological Association all day, and traffic was a little bit crazy, so I miscalculated the time. So, my name is Cristalis Capielo. I'm originally from the island of Puerto Rico. I do not have a background in fishery biology. That was a passion and a love that I gained through my husband, Steve Saul. He was the actual originator of the course, and actually after that I translated the course into Spanish so that we could better serve the population in Miami. And hopefully that the presentation that we have for you today will give you some information about what we've been doing, some of the lessons that we learned, how the class has evolved, and how it's actually part of the Biscayne National Park Service. So if you guys are ready, I'm just going to go ahead and share with you the presentation, and if you have any questions or concerns, just let us know. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. Okay, so I'm going to, if you give me a second. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me just move this from here. Okay, so the program that we started back in 2007, we have called it the Catch and Release Program, in collaboration with Biscayne National Park and Everglades National Park. And as you can see, the picture that you have on your right is actually one of the pictures that we took at one of our classes as Captain Moratori, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit more later about his role in the class. And then on the left, you see a picture of one of the parks officers doing their measuring the fish and actually educating some of the park patrons on the different regulations and whatnot. Okay, so I'm going to here. Alright, so the objectives of the presentation today, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the class, how it was developed back in 2007. I'm going to discuss some of the curriculum structure, what has been the impact in the park, what are some of the things that we have had to change, as well as some of the things that we have learned from the class in Miami, and what are some of the future directions, and how can we expand the course. Okay, so down here in Miami, we're quite fortunate because we do have 3 national parks as well as a national preserve. And this is actually one of the first slides that we present the people in the class. A lot of them have lived in Miami their entire lives. Other people have migrated, mainly from Cuba and other Central American countries, and they're not aware that we have such a rich environment around South Florida. And this is one of the things that we tell them, that we're very fortunate that we have this resources, and the purpose of the class is to help maintain these resources not only for them but for also the future, the economic future, and the future of the generations in South Florida. The park, Biscayne National Park, it consists of living coral reefs, seagrasses, meadows, and tropical lagoons, and we also have over 500 species of fish in Biscayne National Park. They all work together to create an ecological balance, and many of the fish species in the park support South Florida economically. I do believe the value is I think about $4 billion, the fishery, commercial as well as recreational in in Florida. So part of the curriculum of the class is to tell them about this and why the regulations are important. Safety. So in Biscayne National Park, the right to regulate the fishing belongs to the state of Florida. So when the park was enacted, the state of Florida told the federal government, yes, you can go ahead and take this property, you can take this land, this location, and convert it into a national park. However, we're going to reserve the right to regulate the fishing. So when someone in the park receives a fishing violation, it is a federal crime because they're in a federal place. However, they have to follow state law. So it gets to be a little bit confusing for the people in the park. The park also changes fishing regulations in accordance to other state laws. However, within Everglades National Park, they regulate their own fishing. However, to try to make it easier for people in the park, they try to stay pretty close to what the state says the fishing regulations are. However, in some of the cases, Everglades National Park seems to be a little bit more stringent, particularly with fishing gear as well as some fish species, for example, the grouper. So when someone comes to the park and they receive a fishing violation, it's a federal Class C misdemeanor. And the reason they come to the class is as a mitigation for that violation that they receive. So when they come, they do not need to pay the fine. They do have to, however, pay $50 to come to the class, and those $50 are used for the materials that we give them. We give them books, we give copies, we give them the manual for the class. So all the money that we collect goes towards that purpose. However, if someone has an egregious violation, they can receive fines to up to $5,000, so they can be incarcerated for about 6 months. However, when they come to the class, they take that option. They don't have to face any of that, of course, and they don't have to pay the fine. Oh, 1 second, I lost my mouse. Okay, here we go. So fishing violations not allowed. Fishing regulations not allowed followed. 35% of the total violations are due to fishing. A lot of this we see is because we have a lot of new people that are not originally from South Florida and they're not as familiar with the regulation. An example that I can give you, a lot of people from the Caribbean, they consider one of our fish species, which is parrotfish, to be edible. However, in Florida, we consider that to be an ornamental species. So when they come to the park and they fish for parrotfish, they think, you know, it's for a game. They can go ahead and use it and eat it and just do whatever they want with it. However, they are infringing in the parks and state regulations, and they're not aware of that. So a lot of the violations that we see in the park is because people are not familiar with the regulations. The regulations are very difficult to understand. Actually, the translated version of the regulation in Spanish, there's discrepancy between the species and the translation, so that becomes very confusing for people. Who is in charge of regulating? So there are multiple management agencies, multiple jurisdictions, and the purpose of fishing regulation is poorly understood. A lot of people think that a lot of these regulations are arbitrary and therefore are less likely to follow them. And the graph that you see at the bottom of the bottom right of the screen are we collected data from fishing violations in the park since 1998 until last year, and as you can see, the violations oscillate. And what we've seen is that it has to do a lot with the season, particularly during the summertime. We see a spike on fishing violations, and whereas during the windy time, April, March, February, those fishing violations tend to go down. Another reason why we believe that violations have gone up is because now that the officers have a resource to help regulate and help educate the people about the regulations, they're more likely to give citations and refer people to the class. So that's another one of the reasons why we sometimes see that spike on violations. So one of the things that we tell participants when they first come in is that the need for regulation goes together with the increase in population in South Florida and Florida. And if you can see from the top graph on your screen, you see that in the 1830s, the population in South Florida, in Florida, I'm sorry, was very, very low. However, as the time progresses, the population increases. The last census data tells us that in Florida there are about 18.1 million people leaving. So one of the things that we try to tell people is, as more and more people come to Florida, you have more and more people competing for a resource that is limited, and that's why we need to have regulations in place. Something else that we have observed, and this is data from one of the professors at the University of Miami in 2007, he wanted to look at the amount of fishing in commercial fleets in South Florida, and he looked at Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Monroe, and Collier counties. And something that he found that was quite interesting is that from 1965 until about 2005, the commercial fleet has maintained, has been quite steady. There haven't been really any significant spikes on the amount of commercial fleets. However, something that he observed and he pointed out was that the recreational fleets, so people that just go out there on the weekends or that just fish recreationally, has gone up increasingly over the years, and that's another reason why we tell the individuals that come to the class what we need regulation. Again, just more people having access to the water, better navigation system, GPS, so it makes it a lot easier for them to have access to the fish as a resource, and that's why we need to have regulation. So an overview of Biscayne National Park. Much of the park is underwater. With the boundaries, you can see them. They're demarcated with that yellow line. Due to the proximity to Miami, which is the largest metro area in the U.S., law enforcement rangers they have a lot of responsibilities, and they not only have to look over fishing violations, they also have to deal with driving while driving a boat. They have to deal with immigration because of where we're located. So those are some of the things that the park needs to work with and needs to regulate. And all of this resulted in documented declines in fish abundance and reproductive potential within Biscayne National Park. And that's when we came in 2007. They contacted my husband, who at the time he was a student at the University of Miami, and he was offered this opportunity to create a class to educate the public about the ecological and biological reasons of why we have regulations in an effort to educate the public and the people who come to the park about fishing. So as a result, this is when we created the class. Again, this was back in 2007. We have run it every year. We have one class a month, one in English and one in Spanish. And we have had over 500 participants come to our class. Because of the South Florida population, we have an English class and we have a Spanish class so that we can better serve the community. Not only is this class open to people who have fishing violations, but something that we stress is that the public also takes advantage of that. So one of the things that we always tell people who receive violations is that if they have a family member or a neighbor or a friend that they would like to invite, they're more than welcome to come. And the people who come from the public, they do not need to pay to attend the class. So some of the objectives that we have for the class is we try to teach the anglers to understand the local fishing regulations, as well as how to identify fish. Something that we find is because we have so many people from in South Florida who come from so many different places, is that they all have different ways of naming the fish. Every single class we have in Spanish, we learn a new way of how to call a particular fish. So although we do it in Spanish, something that we try to stress is for the people who come to learn the name in English so that they know what the actual name is in the regulation and try to streamline it and make it a little bit more standardized. We help the anglers understand how to interpret the regulations, not memorize them. And the reason why they don't memorize, we encourage them to not memorize them, is because here in the state of Florida, regulations change every 6 months. We also teach them new ethical fishing techniques. For instance, after we tell them, okay, so if the regulation is that you can only catch 10 snappers a day and you catch that number 11, how can you ethically and safely put that fish back in the water? And for that, we actually have a local angler, and later on I'll explain why we decided to do that and not have an officer or have one of us explain why, but actually have someone who has experience in the water and who we consider to be more familiar and more like the people who come to the class, to come to the park to fish. And finally, we teach them how to understand the impact that they have in the marine environment. The course is about 3.5 hours in duration. I mentioned before, we charge them $50 to come to the class, and this is all to supply the cost of materials and other supplies. At the officer's discretion, the individual who receives a fishing citation is given a course flyer, and then they're told that they have 30 days to register for the class. They do not have to pay the ticket, and then what they do is, once they come to the class, they receive a certificate, a copy of that certificate is given to the park officer, and then the day of court, instead of having the defendant go to court, the officer goes on their behalf, they present a copy of that certificate, and then the charges are dismissed. So people really seem to like it because they only pay $50, and then they avoid having to go to court, having to take a day out from work and having to pay parking and whatnot. So they find the option quite attractive. At the end of the course, there's a short exam. It's about 23 questions long, and they're required to have an 80% or better. So something that I can tell you, something that we have learned is we have people from all walks of life, all different educational attainments, people who maybe went to school up to 3rd grade, and we have people who are doctors and lawyers. So something that we have had to do is adjust the way that the exams are administered. In some cases, either Steve or I have had to sit with the participant and do the exam orally because they cannot read it, or maybe they need glasses and they don't have the money to pay for glasses. So those are some of the things that we have had to be flexible with when administering the exam. And like I said, when the court date arrives, the defendant does not have to come, and the officer goes on their behalf. We still good with time? I don't know if you can do a thumbs up if I'm still good with time.
You got about 15 minutes left.
Okay. So the class is only offered once. The person comes to the fishing education class as a mitigation for their ticket. However, if they have another ticket after that, they're not allowed to come back to the class. Let's see. Let me just go to stuff that I think are a little bit more important. So the people that are involved in teaching the class, you have the course coordinator, which in this case will be either my husband or myself. Every other day we call the park, and we make sure that we listen to the messages and we register the people. We are the liaison between the park and the court. We're the ones who produce the certificates and put all the materials together. And we teach about a third of the class during class day. We also have a fishery biologist, and she usually teaches the park the fishing regulation as well as the biological reasons and the ecological reasons of why we have fishing regulations. We also have that local fishing guy, and it was, as I mentioned, was the first picture on the presentation. He instructs the part of the class that has to do with ethical angling. So, like I said, if they want to let that fish go, or they have their bag limit, how can they safely do it? Although they do not teach a portion of the class, we always have one of the rangers come to the course. And they're usually there to answer questions. So if the participant, they don't know what to do with the ticket, they're afraid of what's going to happen in court, a park ranger is always there to answer the questions. Someone else who's important to the class, however, They do not attend the class is the U.S. Attorney's Office. They are the liaison between the National Park Service and the U.S. magistrates, and they facilitate the dismissal of the cases, and they also receive a copy of that certificate once the person comes back, once the person completes the class. So the reason why we have a local fishing guide instruct part of the class is because we think that we don't want this class to be antagonistic. We want them, the point of the class is not for them to feel bad for having a violation. We don't go there and tell them, you know, you did something wrong, don't do it again. And by having a local person that, you know, they can better identify with, we see that, you know, they feel a little bit better, they feel more comfortable, and we do believe that by having someone like them, they're more likely to absorb the material and to see that it's done in a friendly manner and not in an antagonistic or adversarial manner. Once again, the class was created in 2007 with Biscayne National Park. It was a collective input from many stakeholders, both employed by the park and from the local community. And some of these people were the resource managers. You had scientists from the University of Miami, the law enforcement personnel they play a key role, particularly telling us the type of violations that they saw, the U.S. Attorney from the Environmental Crimes Unit, the park education and interpretation staff in terms of how to create, how to better present the class, and the members of the local fishing community also had a big part in creating the curriculum. The course was pilot tested several times. We went through many editions. From the class, the first time, we didn't think that we had to translate it into Spanish. I was the one who was doing the translation on the back. However, we soon learned that over half of the class didn't know any English. So it was my voice competing with the person who was teaching. So we soon learned that we had to create a Spanish version. And that created a lot of challenges because a lot of the language and the regulations were very difficult to translate. It is continuously updated to meet the need of the community, as well as to reflect the different changes in the regulations. So here are some graphs about the type of violations, the species that are involved in bag limit citations, and the species that are involved in size limit citations. So in terms of